Good morning. So, we continue our discussion of New Hollywood, second wave directors. So, we have been talking about the first wave, Francis Coppola, Hal Ashby, Arthur Penn and several others of that period. And second wave directors, key people are Paul Schrader and Scorsese. Schrader was of course also a screenwriter who has collaborated with Martin Scorsese on a couple of major projects. We have De Palma, okay, who was hugely influenced by Hitchcock's style. John Milius, basically a screenwriter, and we will discuss his work also. Terrence Malick, a very significant filmmaker who has a very restricted body of work, and we will look at some of his major films. And then in between we have someone called Michael Cimino, who made the great, one and only great movie of his career, that was The Deer Hunter. We will also discuss at length some major films of Roman Polanski and then we will see how the new Hollywood movement, it was all neatly tied up with the advent of Spielberg and George Lucas. So, these are the key people. And just to recap whatever we have been doing so far, what was New Hollywood all about? First wave as well as second wave directors, they aspired to become authors. We have to remember that. And what was author theory? It was basically the driven by directors, director heavy films. Director is the key figure in these movies, rather than the producer or the star. So, they were not star vehicles, they were not high budget films which was produced by a big studio, but the director's name carried the film forward. That was the idea of author theory, especially in America. These films were characterized by complex characterization. This is, more and more characters on screen, they became inwardly conscious, more and more like Dostoevskian characters. Dostoevsky was a huge influence on most of these second wave directors. For example, Paul Schrader, the way he conceptualized Travis Bickle's character in Taxi Driver. So, it is all based on works by Dostoevsky, especially Notes from the Underground. Sorry. New Hollywood movies were also character and theme driven rather than plot driven. Okay, so plot was not that important, but they were more study in characters and more centered on a particular idea rather than building a very cohesive plot, very well structured plot around it. New Hollywood films were all about building up a character and doing an in-depth study of that character. For example, the other day we were looking at Mean Streets, and someone rightly pointed out that Harvey Keitel's character is torn between his fascination for the street life, the gangster's life, as well as his commitment towards his Catholic upbringing. Okay. So, Mean Streets on the other hand, like most movies of the New Hollywood period, was extremely character driven. So, that is what we have to remember. They were not plot heavy the way studio movies, classic Hollywood movies used to be. New Hollywood movies were extremely personal in nature. Director's own personality came to the fore. Now, consider people like Coppola, consider people like Roman Polanski, and we will soon look at his major features. Consider people like Schrader and Scorsese. They made personal films, authors all, and they made personal films, films which were a reflection of their own character, personality, okay, extension of their personality. This you can't say about the films of the older authors. for example, Howard Hawks or even John Ford. So those things were not found in them. So you can't say, oh, John Ford is like this because you look at John Wayne characters in the Searchers. That's not the case. But here when you see Harvey Keitel is like this, you know that Martin Scorsese himself is like that. So therefore we are talking about a new Hollywood movie which were intensely personal in nature. We have already talked about music, most of which was sourced, and they did not believe in creating an original soundtrack for that. That came much later. Of course, there were movies which became major blockbusters even in the late 70s, but that's not the major feature, that's not the key element of the new Hollywood period. Okay, so Terrence Malick, first major film was Badlands, based on, again it's a Bonnie and Clyde kind of story, based on the real life 1958 Midwest killing spree of Charlie Starkweather and his 14-year-old girlfriend Carol Ann Fugate. So these were real life people on whose escapades the movie was made. So think Bonnie and Clyde, think natural born killers, and Terrence Malick. So this was also a period when filmmakers were looking around for original stories which they can explore around, rather than developing a screenplay which was based on someone else's material. Remember the apprehensions Coppola had before making The Godfather. What were the what were the issues they had with The Godfather? Because it was already made on, it's based on a novel, and nobody, the so-called authors or people who had ambitions of becoming authors, they did not want to make films based on someone else's material. They wanted to develop their own materials. So Terrence Malick was highly original in that way. Do you remember any other movie? I think Ranjit has watched one of his movies in earlier courses. Days of Heaven. Okay, so another major movie by Terrence Malick is Days of Heaven. Where shall I write it? Don't confuse it with Days of Thunder. That is Tom Cruise. That's a high concept film. We were talking about Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. Now, while all these things were happening in Hollywood, we had another major talent emerging, George Lucas. George Lucas, who we all know as the director of Star Wars. His first film was a sci-fi movie, 1971, THX, which is set in 25th century. Okay, so goes a step beyond Matrix. And Lucas, remember, we often mention Lucas and Spielberg in the same breath. They collaborated on Indiana Jones, of course. Why else? Yeah, science fiction movies. Okay, so they were always interested in making the so-called science fiction genre of films. Okay, and these films don't come cheap. They are always big budget. And what was the new Hollywood concept all about? Low budget movies. Okay, so you have to remember why they stand out among the plethora of the other new wave Hollywood filmmakers. Another point, that another feature which both Lucas and Spielberg had in common was that they both came from small towns. They were not like New Yorkers or people who were born in LA, Coppola and Scorsese are New Yorkers, remember? Other filmmakers are all majorly from LA. Both Lucas and Spielberg come from small towns, and this reflects in their movies. Why? These people had grown up on those classic Hollywood kind of films. So the movies that their small town theatres would show would be those classic movies which talked about American individualism, heroism, okay, and strong plots. So this is a major contention that Lucas had against the new Hollywood cinema. He said every movie in the last 10 years has pointed out how terrible we are. Okay, that Americans are terrible people. In the last 10 years, that's all we have been doing. How wrong we were in Vietnam, how we have ruined the world. Okay, and Lucas said it's time to go back to a more utopian kind of cinema. So further he said, I wanted to preserve what a certain generation of Americans thought being a teenager was really about from between 1945 and 1962. Now, John Kennedy was assassinated after this period. 1945 is a period of America's peak. America was at its peak in terms of its economy and its political power. It became a major superpower post Second World War, right? Okay, and this is the best period in American history. There were no political assassinations. Okay, there was no Vietnam, and he wanted to hark back to those times. Result was American Graffiti. How many of you have watched the movie? No, watch it. Okay, this is a must watch for anyone who is interested seriously in films. American Graffiti, 1973. It's set in 1950s America. Small town again. For that matter, even Spielberg's E.T. is set in a small town. So it's a nostalgic take on America's glorious past. It's about teenage rites of passage, and it kick-started the careers of Ron Howard, Richard Dreyfuss and Harrison Ford. The basic plot is very simple. Two schoolboys, they have just finished, they are just out of high school, they have been admitted to a city college and they are ready to fly out of their small town nest. The anxieties they go through okay, before joining college, and it's a movie which is very tightly structured, okay, within a span of 24 hours, and what they think, and what they discuss their anxieties, their concerns, their discomfort with losing something which is so comfortable, you know, warm, cozy environment, and seeking out careers in an unknown world, cold, unknown city, no one knows. So all those things, and it's a lot of talk, lot of music, and lots of boys bonding. So that's the movie all about. And one reason for its enormous success and popularity was that it was out and out soundtrack driven. Every major incident has a score for it, all sourced music. And during the 50s, there was a popular teenage rock band, Billy Haley and the Comets, Rock Round the Clock, and that is the theme score of American Graffiti. Again, we were talking about Scorsese. His very first feature included was Who Is That Knocking at My Door, and you see picture of Harvey Keitel coming out of a theatre, and what's the movie? Rio Bravo by Howard Hawks. Howard Hawks starring John Wayne and Dean Martin. Okay, so again Scorsese making a very personal very first feature, a very personal movie, homage to Howard Hawks. Okay, that's what we are looking at. This is what they have been doing. This is the kind of cinema they made, which were an extension of their own personality. After Mean Streets, which we have already discussed at some length yesterday, so after Mean Streets, Scorsese became real big. Many people wanted to work with him, and the studio gave him the script of Alice Doesn't Live Here anymore, which is the only movie which is so called woman centric in Scorsese's oeuvre. So it deals with the trials and anxieties of a woman played by Ellen Burstyn. Okay, she won the Academy Award for this. The movie has become so popular because of its strong feminist overtones that there is a feminist critic called Teresa Lauretis, who has written a book called Alice Doesn't by Teresa Lauretis. It's a book about feminist representation in Hollywood cinema of the 70s. Okay, another feature of this period was of course the influence and impact of method acting, and we have already done method acting to some extent. Themes and characters, as we were talking about. So characters were socially defined, non-conformists, the proverbial outsiders, more inwardly looking, more inwardly conscious than socially conscious heroes. Directors believed in a strong expression of their individuality. So the heroes now didn't have any case to investigate, unlike the Humphrey Bogarts, the Noah heroes. There was no woman to love and to die for. There were no goals, defining goals, and the so-called affirmative consequential model that was totally eschewed. And this model was replaced by open-endedness. A good example of this open-endedness is the cinema of Nicholas Roeg. I will write his name here. Nicholas Roeg. Don't Look Now. I am not asking you. Then Don't Look Now. That's the title of the movie, starring Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland. And another movie of his that I often refer to is Performance. So Don't Look Now and Performance is just one or two of the movies starring the great Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stone rock star. Yesterday we were talking about the interest in demonic possessions, poltergeism and Satanisms. So two major blockbusters of that period, The Exorcist, William Friedkin's movie, which was preceded by his blockbuster The French Connection. We have already seen what a major blockbuster The Exorcist was, and Carrie by Brian De Palma. So both these movies in horror, belonging to the horror genre, and extremely interested in the supernatural and demonic possessions. Movies of this time were also critical of politics and media. This is important. Okay, Andy Warhol gave us an immortal expression. What's that? Critique of media. 15 minutes of fame. He said in future anyone can be famous for 15, or any person can have their share of 15 minutes of fame. And what do you have to do for that? Say or do something absolutely inane or outrageous, and you will be well known. You don't have to really do anything significant. Okay, so you don't have to be a great actor or a great political leader or a great economist to be splashed all over the place. Okay, so that's what network is all about. Network is about how media plays the celebrity game, how media hypes certain people just to up their TRPs. And we are talking about this movie which was made in during the 70s. Okay, so very important movie, both Nashville and Network. And Network has a very impressive cast: Faye Dunaway, Robert Duvall, Peter Finch, William Holden. Okay, so an excellent movie. And Nashville we have been talking about, and it's set in a small town called Nashville, directed by Robert Altman. Now, Roman Polanski, another major director of that period. How many of you have seen his short film, Two Men and a Wardrobe? Please do make a note of it. Two Men and a Wardrobe by Roman Polanski. And it tells you a lot about how Polanski is interested in exploring the twin issues of time and space. It's a very abstract film, not easy to understand. I remember we were shown this movie when I was at FTII Pune, and we spent the entire day discussing what it's all about. It's not very easy to understand, but that's the entire idea about. Repulsion is starring the French actress Catherine Deneuve, set in London, and it's about isolation and paranoia, two recurring features in the films of Roman Polanski. Do you know his background? We are still talking about new wave directors making intensely personal films. Do you know anything about Polanski's background? His wife Sharon was murdered by the Manson family, but that was following the phenomenal success of Rosemary's Baby. So that's his life after he became big. But what happened to him earlier? He was a Polish Jew, and some of you are already familiar with Sophie's Choice, William Styrens, and during the peak of anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic feelings in Europe, Polanski, along with his family, I'm talking about his parents, he was captured and they were being deported to Auschwitz. And his mother threw the little boy, he was just 8 years old, somehow she managed to open the door of the moving train and threw him out. Okay, after that he never saw his mother again. She died while she was in Auschwitz. His father survived, but those harrowing memories always remained with him. So therefore this constant feeling of paranoia, suspicion and betrayal. It's always there in his films. And then of course following the tragic event of his wife's murder by a serial killer, and that was another very a harrowing period for Roman Polanski. Do you know any other movie by him? Chinatown, of course, we'll talk about, but anything else he has done? What else happened to him?
He had to flee the USA because of claims of molesting a child.
Yeah.
So because of that, when his movie The Pianist was nominated at the Oscars last decade, he couldn't go to America. Because
Good. Yeah, so he's still living in exile, self-imposed exile, because in the US he is a wanted man. He has been charged with statutory rape. Okay, the woman that people say that she was not exactly a child but a minor. So the recurring themes: suspicion, human cruelty were least expected, dark intrigues, pagan rituals. Have you watched Rosemary's Baby? Okay, please do watch it. Okay, so you will understand a lot about pagan rituals in New York. So Rosemary's Baby, based on Ira Levin's novel by the same name. The entire movie is set in a New York apartment. The leading man is played by the great director John Cassavetes. We have been discussing his films. In the movie, he is a New York method actor, and he is not doing too well. So the implication is that he has made a pact with the devil. So the the ironic subtext is that actors can go to any length to make it big. Rosemary played by Mia Farrow, okay, who later became Woody Allen's muse, wife, and then nemesis. Okay, so she was many things, but after Rosemary's Baby, she made another. Rosemary's Baby was a big success, critical as well as commercial. This was followed by The Great Gatsby, okay, where she plays Daisy to Robert Redford's Gatsby, J. Gatsby. The screenplay was written by Coppola. And after that, her career was in hibernation till she was rediscovered by Woody Allen. So Rosemary believes that her husband is in league with Satan, and that when she is pregnant, she believes that her baby will be taken away from her by her demonic neighbors, and believes that her husband is also in league with her neighbors, who are all followers of Satan. So they follow these pagan rituals and have some gems and pieces of jewelry which have strange fragrance emanating from them. All these things, it's a very dark, very intriguing film, and is open-ended. At the end, she believes she has given birth to Satan. Okay, so it's called The Year of the Great Satan. 1966 is believed to be the year of Satan. And she believes she is the mother of Satan. At the end, she looks at the baby's face. We are never shown the baby's face, and that's where the movie ends. We don't know what the baby actually looks like. Whether she was dreaming it all along, or she's just going paranoid because of her claustrophobic surroundings, or whether indeed she has given birth to Satan. We are never given satisfactory responses to that. His most successful movie, Chinatown, 1974. It has a number of great lines. The movie ends with the detective Escobar telling Jack Gittes, played by Nicholson. Forget Jake, it's Chinatown. So Jack Nicholson is a hard-boiled detective, almost in the noble league of Humphrey Bogart's and other detective heroes from film noir. Chinatown is a neo-noir. Okay, neo-noir, how do we differentiate the classic noir from neo-noir? Are there any differences? If I tell you Usual Suspects is a neo-noir, Memento is a neo-noir, and Chinatown is the first of neo-noir, then what are the features of this genre, subgenre?
The classic noirs were all of the late 30s and 40s and early 50s, I guess, but after that time I think it was the musicals which came into prominence. It was only from the 70s that we have film noirs popping up.
Renewed interest in noir. Okay, but are there any defining features of neo-noir? I am not just talking about the period, but are there any is neo-noir in any way different from the original noir? Not exactly, except that in neo-noir you have many more contemporary themes to reflect on. Okay, so if there is Memento, then what are the themes? The construct of memory. Okay, that's a very important feature of neo-noir, how memory plays its role in defining characters and pushing a plot. The basic theme is that of land grabbing in California. You should do some research on this, land grabbing in California. I think you would know. Ranjit, you are into this kind of city studies and all. So do look up on the land grabbing and developing of the entire California Valley. Okay, how did that city become so prosperous all of a sudden? What games did real estate people play in making that particular valley so prosperous and rich that the prices just skyrocketed? Okay, so there is a history there. There is a lot of financial intrigue happening there. So please look it up. Chinatown starred Jack Nicholson, John Huston. Okay, John Huston, who was also a director. What did he direct? The Maltese Falcon, remember, with Humphrey Bogart. The Treasure of Sierra Madre. Faye Dunaway, and the movie was produced by Robert Evans. Robert Towne officially wrote the screenplay for this. This is one of those movies where he was not just the script doctor, but also the official writer. For the major part of the movie, this is the way Jack Nicholson looked like. Yeah. Why? The thugs who are involved in land grabbing, and he is the detective. He is investigating a murder, and the thugs catch hold of him and they say, "You are a very nosy man." And you know what we do to people who are so nosy? We cut off their noses. So they tried, and the hand that chops off Jack Nicholson's nose belongs to Roman Polanski himself. Okay. The director making an appearance as a thug. Okay, very self-referential, self-conscious. Chinatown has several great moments, but the subtext is incest, and that's a very important part of the narrative. This is where the suspense lies. Faye Dunaway's character, who is John Huston's daughter in the movie, and later on we are told that she has been molested by her own father when she was 14 or 15 and has given birth to her father's child, a daughter. So at the end, when Jack Nicholson confronts her and he asks her, who is this girl? Okay, tell me the truth, I want the truth. And she says, she's my sister, and he slaps her. Then she says, she's my daughter, and he slaps her again. And then she blurts out, she's my sister and my daughter. Okay, and then she asks him if he is able to understand what. There is no like elaborate explanation for that. Just that one moment tells us the entire thing, and the depths to which this man, the so-called very respectable real estate person played by John Huston, he can stoop to. Polanski's later works, of course, he had those issues, the legal issues, and he had to leave America. But then he made Frantic with Harrison Ford. It's again a homage to Hitchcock. It's a very suspenseful movie. The Ninth Gate, how many of you have watched the movie? It's like the Da Vinci Code, or that movie with Sean Connery, The Name of the Rose. Remember The Name of the Rose? Based on Umberto Eco's novel. He is a medieval priest, Sean Connery, and he is in search of a very enigmatic lost text by Aristotle. Okay, that's fictional. There is no enigmatic lost text by Aristotle. But the entire movie, the entire suspense is built on that premise. So in The Ninth Gate, Johnny Depp is a rare book dealer and he's tracking down copies of a satanic text. So again, look at Polanski's interest in paganist rituals and Satanism. He won the Oscar for The Pianist. I think Adrian Brody won it too, for the best actor. And through this movie, he revisits the memories of Nazi-occupied Poland. He made a musical, Oliver Twist, based on Charles Dickens' novel, and The Ghostwriter. I am sure most of us here are familiar with Pierce Brosnan's, almost along the lines of Tony Blair, right? The Ghostwriter, which is a tale of political intrigue. Another great director of that period, Alan J. Pakula, and he has made a number of political thrillers. Clute, Parallax View, it's about political assassination. All the President's Men, his most popular movie, starring Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman, and is based on which event? The Watergate scandal, Deep Throat. Presumed Innocent is a murder mystery based on Scott Tarrow's novel of the same name, Harrison Ford, and The Pelican Brief, Julia Roberts and Denzel Washington. We were talking about the how the new wave Hollywood directors were more interested in sourcing music and not in developing or creating an original soundtrack for their pictures. But then one movie came along which changed the equations, and it was such a huge movie, such a great blockbuster, that it went on to influence a generation of musicals, a generation which was hugely influenced by musicals all over the world. There was a period when everybody wanted to look like John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever, directed by John Badham. Again, it's one of those coming of age rites of passage movie. It tries to rework the musicals of classic Hollywood period. Who the musical sensation, the musical stars of that period? Yeah. Good. Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. Gene Kelly, okay, singing in the rain. Those were the musical, the dancing heroes of the 50s, the 40s. Okay. And Travolta brought back the dancing hero, the category of dancing hero. Tony Manera, he is working class, Italian American, lower middle class family from Brooklyn. He has no ambition, remember. Okay, so he leads a very mundane kind of life, works in a paint, in a hardware store, a paint store. But he comes alive on Saturday nights, okay, where he dresses up and goes to a very gaudy discotheque called 2001 Odyssey, homage to Kubrick, of course. During the same period in Hollywood, there was something called Studio 54. Look this up. This is your homework. You have to watch lots of movies and then you have to look up Studio 54. Studio 54 was kind of a very elitist discotheque where only the very rich and influential can find an entry. But then in Travolta's Saturday Night Fever, because they come from a certain background, you can't go to a place like Studio 54. So therefore they have to invent a place, 2001 Odyssey, where people like Tony Manero could walk in. So of course it brought back the musicals in fashion, and in many ways it also reinvented men would dress. Okay, and for a very long time you would find every young man dressed up the way John Travolta's character would be dressed up in the movie. You have to look it up to understand his fashion. Music by the Gibb brothers, and then the legacy of the movie is that it gave birth to the modern dance film. Some of the most well known are Grease, again starring John Travolta, Olivia Newton-John. Grease is also a stage play. Footloose with starring Kevin Bacon, very young Kevin Bacon. Dirty Dancing, Patrick Swayze. And then there were several imitations, including, you can think of a movie like Fast Forward. Okay, so there, you know, a string of movies that followed, that imitated the success of Saturday Night Fever. It's a very dark movie in patches. It's not like American Graffiti or even The Diner. Are you aware of The Diner? Barry Levinson, just note it down. I won't be able to do so much of New Hollywood, but you should know The Diner, which is again like American Graffiti, set in a small town in Baltimore. Barry Levinson directed. To you guys, Barry Levinson would be best known for Rain Man. Rain Man. So he is the director. And The Diner is another very beautiful coming of age movie, starring again Kevin Bacon and Mickey Rourke, very young Mickey Rourke. So this is the last movie today that I would be discussing, Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter. Michael Cimino could never repeat the success of The Deer Hunter. I think we have already done excerpts from the movie, the Russian roulette scene. It's a classic Vietnam picture, came along the heels of Coming Home, Hal Ashby's, The Boys in Company, and Go Tell the Spartans, all Vietnam pictures made in 1978. And Francis was still shooting Apocalypse Now, his magnum opus in Philippines, in rainwater and thunderstorms, and that was released in 1979. The Deer Hunter, if you haven't already watched it, please do watch it. One of the most influential films of that period. It tells you the story of a group of working class Russian Americans from Pennsylvania, such small steel town where most people work in steel industries. And this group of young men, they enlist for the Vietnam War, but before enlisting there are two rituals that have to be followed. One is, one of their friend Steve, okay, played by John Savage, he gets married to his sweetheart. Second is, the men take a trip, a deer hunting trip. The leader of the boys is Robert De Niro. The movie begins with an extended wedding sequence, again paying homage to Coppola's The Godfather, where all the characters are introduced and the plot is set. And then suddenly we are taken to the war scene. In the middle of the war, it's not, we don't see people firing away at each other. We just find that the same group of young men who we just watched getting married and participating in rituals, they are taken prisoners by a group of Vietnamese, and they are forced to play the game of Russian roulette. There were protests from many anti-war Americans that this actually didn't happen. The Vietnamese didn't force anyone to play Russian roulette, and but then for Cimino, that was a metaphor for the brutality of war. He just wanted to show you how evil war could be. Movie was hugely received, phenomenal reception. It won 4 Academy Awards. Best Picture, Best Director for Cimino. Supporting actor for who? Christopher Walken, and editing. Cimino became the toast of town, a new author in the making. So thank you very much, and we'll continue tomorrow.